there, welcome to episode 25 of the Dodgeball Marketing Podcast and Video Podcast if you're on YouTube. My name is Chris and this is Michael.
Hey everybody.
Today our topic is how to avoid disaster with a Google Core update. Now, Google Core update is when Google decides they're going to update their algorithm.
It's when Google does something big enough that they talk about it and everyone on SEO Twitter talks about it and starts crying.
And sets their hair on fire.
Yeah, and sharing war stories and showing charts of stuff going up that they didn't know would go up and stuff going down. And yeah, it's when there's a big change in the Google universe.
It happens. It's Google's universe. We just live in it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of the give you some ways to protect yourself from disaster, and then a little bit of after the disaster happens, kind of gather yourself and say, like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Because it affects everyone when these updates come out, and so it's how to prepare for it, how to move forward if disaster happens.
Yep, that's right. So number one, fresh, steady, relevant content is critical. So Google is really just trying to help their audience find what they're looking for more and more easily. So when they make a core update, there's no conspiracy. They're not going after certain websites, and they're not lifting up certain perspectives and damaging others. Now, there are things like the Medic update that tended to squelch non-professionalized, non-credentialed healthcare information or health information. So there are some times when there are updates that are a little more pointed and a little bit more observable around particular industries. But in general, with a core update, it's some broad set of changes that they're making under the hood to improve the user experience. That's what they're trying to do. They're not trying to attack anybody personally. So the biggest thing that they say is just focus on producing valuable content. And so we've got to take them at their word. So here's what that looks like to put a little bit of skin and bones on that platitude. Produce steady content. Your website, if you're going 30 days with no new pages hitting your website, you're essentially just transmitting dead air out into the ether. And so Google is seeing that and they're saying, well, there's not really a lot going on there. You really should have anywhere between 2 and 10 new pages of content hitting your website every month. Now, if you're working with an SEO agency, you've probably got some blog posts happening, but what about services pages being updated? What about subservices being broken out in more detail and linking between your subservices pages and your services pages? For your products, are you appropriately creating more useful information and highlighting the most important information and creating secondary pages for supporting information, technical specs, access to the manual, whatever it is, user stories? Are you creating new pages that your users can see and get to, but search engines can index? If you're creating that steady flow of new valuable content and breaking it up and structuring it in as useful a way as possible, Google's always going to see that as a good thing. And no matter how small you are, nobody's small enough that they would never have something new to say. Mm-hmm. So a minimum of the lights being on at home is between 2 and 10 pages a month. Chris, talk to me about this next topic. I want to ask you about page speed. What is kind of the framework of how to think about page speed in relation to avoiding these big disasters?
Well, I would say just keep tabs on it.
Okay.
Google, as we've talked about on this podcast before, really cares about page speed. It's a ranking factor, and it's only going to get more stringent, right?
Right.
And so,
in part because of these guys' phones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, keeping a monitor on, websites evolve over time. If you're on WordPress, for instance, your theme might update. You're going to add new plugins. You're going to add new images. A lot of things that might bog down your site. So it's a really good idea because we know that when Google does core updates, they oftentimes will include speed in that update and demote sites that aren't there, whatever their new bar is for speed, demote sites that fall below that bar. It's a good practice to keep a good tab on your page speed. So you're going to use Google's free tool called Google Page. What's it called?
Yeah, Google Page Speed. If you go to Google and just search for Google Page Speed tool, you'll go right to it.
So a good thing to put on your to-do list is every month run your site through that. Maybe keep a spreadsheet on what it was before, what it is now, and it's going to be a score. There's a mobile score and the desktop score, and more importantly, there are things inside that report. It's very detailed,
Yeah.
and it's going to show you exactly what you should address. Maybe it's images, maybe it's caching, maybe it's JavaScript. Who knows what? And they'll divide it up into categories, and they'll tell you what's harming your site the most when it comes to page speed. So once a month, it's a good idea to print that out and save it. And if you see your page speed creeping down, start taking proactive action to correct that. And that's a really great way to prepare for a Google update that might include page speed as one of its factors.
Absolutely. Yeah, websites are sort of a living, breathing organism in an environment of living, breathing organisms. They're all sort of checking in with each other. And so when you have, if you have plugins that get updated automatically, or Google makes a change, these you can have change on both sides that can change that relationship to how they perceive page speed, and they'll straight up knock a site down for just page speed.
Yeah, great. And so, Michael, let's have you take this next one. Use best practices for access and usability. So, why don't you explain that one to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are just a couple of issues here that you can use to scan a website, and you can get online and look for these. But what you want to do is make sure that your website is working for most types of users. And this can be this can range from anywhere to differently abled users. So using alt text on images is a real basic thing for people who are maybe vision impaired and are using a different type of interface than most other folks are using. And so using the basics, and this is kind of in that realm of something to ask your web developer about. So it gets kind of technical, but
Could it be something also like contrast on a page? Like if there's not enough contrast between text and background color or something like that?
Yeah, and then a phrase that, so I worked with an agency for a couple of years, Immersion Active, and something that David Weigelt was always really passionate about there was that it's not, their focus was older consumers or sort of the baby boomer market, and they would say it's not about big fonts. It's not that simple. Instead, they would focus on universal design. So universal design is, can anybody get to this page and kind of function and do what they're trying to do? And so using the online tools for running a scan for either HTML compliance or ADA, Americans with Disability Act compliance, those are going to give you some basics, and they might highlight some lesser known problems that can become flat red flags for search engines. So when you've got a Google core update, sometimes they're just saying, well, how do we decide who's best and who doesn't have a good website? They've got some big categories that they can use, and sometimes these scans pick up things that are basically just usability problems on the website. So talk to your web developer and say, hey, is our website compliant with all of the different parameters for folks who are differently abled? And they'll say, well, I don't know, let me check. This is in that category of thoroughness when it comes to doing SEO, search engine optimization, or usability. But the basic principle is, if it doesn't work for a handful of folks, it's probably not working as well as it could for everyone. So usability and design, basics, being able to do things, font size, thinking about not having overlapping elements, not having any sort of archaic elements that are not really good coding. And those are things that you'll catch with mobile use. We've gotten away from having left sidebars on pages. They just don't flow well when you go to a mobile device, and so they're just, one column is pretty standard now. I would avoid falling into the trap of thinking that really big fonts are important for your audience. They might even be adjusting for that. You want to kind of aim for the mainstream and use just basic, good, solid, clean look and feel where you're trying to let people interact and do things functionally. Right. So using those scans like any sort of compliance, basically HTML compliance, you want to make sure that you're just using those and having your web developer run those, once or twice a year.
That's great.
Yeah.
Fourth, how to avoid a Google disaster or a core update is monitor and understand the changes in traffic after the disaster happens. So a lot of times, Michael, I know you've experienced this before with clients, like the traffic may go down and plummet quite a bit after core update, but the damage isn't really as bad as it looks, because you're looking at big picture metrics like number of the amount of traffic, like
Yeah.
the number of hits or whatever.
Right.
So a good thing to do, if you're a local business especially, would be, here's an example of something that looks bad but is not really bad. So let's say you're a kitchen remodel. I always use kitchen remodel, but just a local business.
Yeah.
So say you're a kitchen remodeler in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Right. And your traffic goes down after a core update, but you look at your traffic before and after, and you happen to get a lot of traffic from other states where you don't really provide service, like Arizona and Florida and whatever. Maybe you had blog content that was more generalized, and those were coming in from those places where you can't serve those people.
Right.
So if that's the case and your traffic in Minneapolis and the surrounding area is intact, well, then the core update really, Google might have been trying to help you by focusing more on your service area because it's understanding you more as a local business. And so someone from Florida, while they might benefit from your content that you're providing, are not really in your customer set, and you're not meant to serve those. So Google's trying to identify localities and what's more appropriate for people in different localities. So
you've really got to dig in to your analytics to understand what's happening, and not to just say more traffic good,
right?
But to say how's business?
Yeah,
how are we doing?
Having a more sophisticated look. Another thing is like your goals on your site. If a core update happens and it lasts for a month, you're getting less traffic but the same amount of leads and sales. Did it really hurt you?
Yeah.
No. So another one might be like bot traffic or something like that.
Yeah.
So maybe
Google's
maybe Google's getting smarter at cleaning out bots and weird segments of traffic that are just spammy. And maybe that's the only thing that went away. Maybe you got to do a better job of filtering that out on Google Analytics or something. So just overall, freak out a little bit, but then look. Allow yourself to freak out a little bit, and then look at the data and say, okay, what have we really lost here? How are we performing in terms of the KPIs of the website? And you might find that it's not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we've definitely seen that before, where we might be running a little bit hot. It's not uncommon for us with search engine optimization as part of what we do to sort of dominate for a category nationally. Even when we're focused on, say, the Boston area for a set of healthcare practices that cover maybe 3 states. And so, it's not uncommon for us to see one of our sites run hot. And so for Google to cut out a lot of out-of-area traffic and rankings for us, not really a real problem, but it sure feels bad to explain that chart.
Yeah. Now, if you went and opened up a practice there, I bet what would happen is you would start to accumulate more traffic there because you'd have a Google My Business profile. You'd start to have those keywords. So it's all, like you said.
That's right. Good. All right. So I'll take our last segment for how to avoid disaster with a Google Core Update. And we talk about this a lot, but being mobile ready. And I want to hit on a couple of different factors here than we've covered in a lot of other places. The Core Updates are heavily focused on thinking about how people are using the internet. And it's easy for us to focus on things like the shape of the blocks on the page and the position and the order of the blocks on the page to a smaller screen. But it's easy for us to overlook what is the mode someone's in when they're trying to accommodate a bit of content they're scrolling before or past to get to what they're trying to do. The set of functions someone's trying to use a website for when they're on the phone are totally different. And the set of things that are sort of part of how they think about using a product or a service from a company are totally different. So things like reputation management become much more important when you're thinking mobile first with your internet strategy. So being mobile ready on your website and with your offsite factors is a really major component of the success of going through Google Core Updates. Here's some basic things with Core Updates to keep in mind around mobile that are going to be evergreen and are going to always get through any kind of problem. Making sure that the most important stuff is at the top of the page and that people don't have to scroll to get it. Making sure that any phone number or form of contact is high on the page. Making sure that your reputation in places like Google My Business is actively monitored and managed, and that if you have any negative reviews or any positives, that you're responding to them quickly in an authentic and real way. Claiming offsite listings to make sure that the links from those other websites pointing to your website show that you're active in your service area. Google knows that there's a high correlation between someone using their phone to find a service provider and the fact that that service could be a local or a national service. So understanding how localization terms are used on both your desktop and your mobile version is really important. We really like to have something in the header that's text that search engines can see that define the service area, not just the office location, but the service area. And then we like to have service areas listed in the footer. And those are really good tactics for thinking about when Google's trying to serve up that phone-based internet, that they're saying somebody's looking for a local provider of whatever, that you've localized well. And the core updates that we've seen, especially the one in December, we saw winners and losers based on how well we had localized websites. And so, yeah, localization is a major factor for the phone users of the internet. So yeah, so this has been How to Avoid Disaster with the Google Core Update. Drop your comments and ideas in the comments area below and hit subscribe. And thanks for being here. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah.